Welcome, one and all, to this latest edition of the Future So Right podcast. This is a Green Flame Press production, and I am your host, Pete Beal, and it's great to be back at the microphone recording another episode for you. It's been a little while. Our last episode, where we were discussing the costs of self-publishing, I didn't really state this in the episode, but I recorded that quite a bit before it came out. I just had a hectic few weeks, so I'd recorded that one early. Now I'm sitting here only about a day before this episode's going to come out recording this, so it's been quite a while since I've actually recorded an episode, so hopefully there aren't too many cobwebs for me to knock off, right? If you haven't caught the last episode of this publishing series, we went over the financial costs of self-publishing. I'll have that link down in the pinned comment below. Go check it out. This is the third in this publishing series. And the point of this series was going through my own experiences publishing my debut novel and hopefully sharing some topics and suggestions and just little tips that I've picked up along the way that could help you in your own publishing journey. So with that in mind, today's topic is going to be cover art, and specifically how you choose your cover art. We'll talk a little bit about finding an artist as well, but I want the main area of focus to be how you determine what's going to go on your cover. What's the actual image? You know, the old saying goes, don't judge a book by its cover, but let's face it, we all do it, don't we? So, hopefully you pick up a little bit of insight, or at least something to think about when you go about making this decision for yourself. I also have a bit of personal news. If you're not really interested in this, I'll put a timestamp down below where you can skip to, it'll tell you where to skip to if you just want to dive right into the cover art conversation. But I actually announced the title, the cover, and the release date of my debut novel since our last episode debuted. I did that on my social media platform, so if you're following me, you've already seen that news. But that's right, my debut epic fantasy novel, The Path of the Rallwielder, will release on September 28th, 2021, and is available for pre-order now at pretty much anywhere where you can buy books. I'll leave a few links down below if anyone is interested in checking that out. I would obviously be grateful for that. I'll probably do, I don't really have this scheduled, but I'll probably do either an episode of this or a YouTube video or something just discussing the book at large. I've done this a little bit on my blog, which is linked down below. It's at my website, petebeal.com. But if you're interested in that, let me know in the comments below. I probably will record something between now and the release date. But we're not here to talk about me, we're here to talk about your book cover. So, how do we go about deciding on our cover art? Well, let's dive a little bit into that. I don't anticipate this is going to be like the last episode, which ended up almost an hour long, but who knows, maybe I'll be quite the windbag today and prove myself wrong. So sit back, relax, grab yourself a snack or a beverage, and enjoy the program. So when it comes to book covers, there are a lot of different design types out there. I should mention that my advice and my thoughts are mainly going to be geared toward fiction books, because that's what I write and that's most of what I read. I don't feel I'm really particularly qualified to comment on nonfiction. So the first thing that I'd probably suggest you do, because you could be listening to this either the day I release it here in 2021, or you could possibly be listening to this 5 years from now. And it's important to stay current when it comes to a book cover design. So what might be a good idea for you is to go out to a major bookseller like Amazon or Barnes & Noble and pull up books in your genre. If you write fantasy, pull up fantasy books. Science fiction, pull up science fiction, mystery, romance, whatever. And take a look at the top sellers. Specifically, look at their covers. You know, trends in the publishing industry are constantly changing, so what's in now very well might not be in 2 years from now. So look and see what is in for your genre right now. What's selling? Chances are, if you look at, say, the top 20 best selling books in your genre, there's going to be similarities between at least half of them, right, in terms of their cover art. Maybe a similar style, a similar design. They're all going to have their different little nuances, but it's going to show you a little bit of what the industry is currently expecting from your genre. Now, that's not to say you can't do something a little unique. Obviously, something unique can help your book stand out, but you need to recognize that there is a certain amount of risk generated with that when you go against the flow. Yes, it could potentially help you stand out, but is it going to help you stand out in a positive way? That's a decision you're going to have to make for yourself. What I ultimately elected to do with my book, in terms of what I wanted to put on the cover, was I decided to go with a scene from the book depicted on the cover. Now, this isn't necessarily the most common trend right now, although there are still books doing it. The reason I ultimately elected to go in this direction for me was I had conversations with my cover artist. I talked a little bit about this last week, but my cover artist is a good friend of mine, so I was able to bounce ideas off of him, try to determine what would visually look best for my book. So we talked about it, and I sent him a few scenes from the book to read, and we landed on this particular scene. Now, if you're going to go this route, you have to choose the scene quite carefully, don't you? For one thing, you don't want to spoil the book on the cover. You don't want to have like an image of your heroic protagonist striking down the evil bad guy on the cover, because you want to keep a certain amount of suspense in your story, don't you? So first off, no spoilers. But what else, what other complications could arise from putting a scene from the book on your cover? Well, it has to be a scene that lends itself to good visuals, right? Things that are eye-catching. What's the setting this scene takes place in? Who are the characters? What's going on that's going to catch a reader's eye if they're scrolling through a list of books on the internet? You know, when it came down to my cover, there were really 3 scenes that had sort of come to my mind, and I hadn't decided that this was the route to go, but there were 3 scenes that were possibilities for me. I ruled one of them out pretty early because it was a scene from late in the book, and it wasn't too spoilery, if that's a word, but I thought it probably just gave away a little bit too much about what happened in those specific pages late in the book. There was another scene that it wouldn't be spoilery. I wonder if that's a word. We're calling it a word. So it wouldn't have been spoilery, but it was more so, it would have been focused on structure, on setting, rather than the overall action of what was happening in the scene itself. Now, I don't doubt it would have been a beautiful piece of artwork, but I wanted something a little bit more eye-catching. So the scene we ended up going with comes from very early in the book, so I'm not too worried about spoilers in that regard. It has certain visuals that I think help it stand out a little bit. I'll put a picture up here if I haven't already, so that you can view the cover, and I'll put up throughout the episode pictures of some sample book covers of what I'm talking about here. So you see, there's action going on this cover, but there's also a certain amount of unknown, right? We don't know what's going on with the water on the cover. We don't know anything about the character because we can't see his face. We don't know anything about these boats that are really just shadows off in the distance at this point. So there's certain things that draw our attention in, but there's also certain aspects that are designed to make a reader wonder, well, what's going on here? Who are these people involved in this scene? In terms of the font for the cover, I'm usually a fan of less is more. My artist sent me a few different options and suggestions. I ended up going with one that I felt was a bit understated. You want the title to stand out, but you also don't want it to distract from the gorgeous artwork. That would be my personal preference. Your preference might be different. Another route you could choose to take in regards to your cover art, and one that I think is particularly popular right now in the fantasy genre, in the young adult reading category, and I also see it quite a bit with romance as well nowadays, is having a character from your book featured sort of front and center. They're sort of the centerpiece of the cover with more of an ambiguous background. Once again, I'm going to throw up some examples here. There's a few advantages and disadvantages, obviously, to this, just like there would be to any other art style. The first sort of great pro to this is that unlike the previous style, there's really no chance of spoiling anything from your story with this regard. All you really have to focus on is a character. One of the downsides is obviously this has to be a very compelling character. It has to be somebody who can command the scene on their own, who just by their very presence is going to entice a reader to pick up your book. I think this works particularly well if you have a character with, say, an interesting facial feature or something very unique about their appearance that makes them stand out. For example, this is really kind of a generic example, I'm not going to lie. Does your character have something like an eye patch? A dead eye? A missing tooth? Something really unique about their appearance that's going to make them really kind of stand out. One example, and it's one of the ones that I'm throwing up on the screen here, is The Gunslinger by Stephen King. Now, this is a bit of an interesting example. I just picked the book up to take a look at it. It is an example of this style, but it's a little different because the character isn't really in detail, is he? His face is covered. All you see is him sort of standing in a shadowed pose. You see a little hint of a background behind him. You see the bird at his feet. It's enough to add intrigue. You want to pick this up, you want to find out who this guy is and what's going on here. Another pro to this art style is that for most artists, this is a pretty simple thing for them to produce. So if you're someone on a budget, this could end up being a great price point option for you. And one thing, always make sure when you're hiring an artist, which we're talking about later, if they're using stock imagery, make sure they have the rights to use that stock imagery. Just imagine publishing a book with someone's face on it and they didn't give permission to use their photograph for that. That could be a real nightmare for you. So that's where we make sure we're dealing with reputable people in this industry, right? So again, we'll talk about that a little bit more later on. But again, I think this can be a great option, particularly if you have a compelling character, if you have somebody, an artist, who can produce a background that's not necessarily, the character is the focal point of the scene, but the background can help seal the deal, right? What sort of environment is this character in? Is a potential buyer going to see this character and think, oh, this is an interesting looking character, I relate to this in some way? Does the background in some way put that purchase over the edge where they're thinking, yeah, I'm definitely going to check this book out. I'm definitely going to click on this book and find out more, or are they going to keep scrolling? It's a very common style, so you want to make sure you're working with the right person, really producing something that's going to stand out, even though it's a common style. It can certainly be done. I've thrown up some examples throughout this segment that I like. I would say if I didn't go, well, I don't know about this. I don't know if I want to go this far because I had so many different ideas in this regard. I was going to say I might have gone this route if I hadn't gone the route that I did, but I don't know that for sure. I have a few characters that I think would really do well here, but I just really like the cover I got, and I really like the route that I ended up going. So I don't want to jump that far into this pool. But again, this is a great option out there, especially, like I said, it's common in fantasy now. It's really common in young adult. And if you really want to produce something that looks professional and that's really following current trends, this being late 2021, this could be a great route to go. Another common thing that you see, especially in genres like horror or thrillers, is where you have a setting as the cover art, but there are no characters involved. And this really works great for books where the setting is almost a character unto itself, where it plays a really key role in the story. And yet again, I'm going to throw some examples up for you. One that stands out to me is a book I read somewhat recently called The Hunting Party by Lucy Foley. So I'm going to throw that cover up here, where really one of the huge factors in the story was the incredible amount of snow at this hunting lodge. And so what they went with here, pick up the book and look at it, what they went with here was just a snowy scene. It has this fancy looking lodge kind of in the background, but almost everything on the cover itself is snow. It creates an interesting look with the red font. In some ways it almost looks empty, but I think it works well for this story because for me, the environment was almost I would have to say it really was my favorite part of that particular book. Another good example I'll throw up here is this particular cover for Salem's Lot by Stephen King, where it shows the house on the hill, where I'm not going to spoil it. If you've read the book, you know what the house is. But obviously it played a key part of the story, and it creates great imagery for that particular genre. I don't think the reason I decided not to go this way, I mentioned earlier that I did consider it. I felt like for my genre, the building that would have been used as the setting would probably feel a bit generic. There are other books that have done similar things, where is this really going to stand out for me in the fantasy genre? I didn't feel that it would, so I went in a different direction. That's not to say it's not a fantastic art style to use. Again, I think it works best for horror and thrillers, but there are other genres as well where it could work. Science fiction comes to mind, particularly if you have some sort of maybe an exotic planet that your characters visit, instead of having the character just have the atmosphere be the focal point. That could potentially be a great option. Or in fantasy, if you have a particularly unique setting that no one's ever done before. I'm trying to think here about a good fantasy book that I liked that went with this option, and to be honest, there aren't many. Think about something like, say, Alice in Wonderland. To me, Wonderland would be a great potential option for this type of a fantastical book, even if it's not necessarily fantasy genre. At least I don't think it's classified as that. That could potentially be a great cover. There was one last style I wanted to touch on just a little bit, really briefly. And to me, this only works if you're writing a series. And the best example that I can possibly think of for this is the Song of Ice and Fire series by George R.R. Martin, where the covers are incredibly simple. They just each have one item on the cover. So, for example, Game of Thrones has a sword or a dagger looking thing on the cover. A Clash of Kings has a crown. A Storm of Swords has a helmet. These each have a certain amount of significance to the stories they're in, but more so the appeal of them is that they're simple. Each one has a different colored background to make it stand out. I'll put a picture of the covers up here so that you can see what I mean. Now, these items have significance to the story, but maybe not as much as, say, the scene type of setting that we were talking about last time, or, say, having your main character on the book. But what I do like about these is you have to sort of think about the significance that this item plays to the story. So, can you think, if you've read these books, why a helmet would play a certain amount of significance in A Storm of Swords? Now, I'm not going to spoil it for you, but let's see. It involves a scene rather late in the book, a rather important fight scene, in case you've read the book and you've never thought about why a helmet would have a particular amount of significance. Having a Clash of Kings, a crown, that one's a bit more on the nose. The dagger on Game of Thrones, if you think about that one shouldn't take too long to figure out. It's a very simplistic design. I honestly think it works, but it really, to me, is only going to work in a series where you're very consistently using this style. I think visually these look great. Like, I have these 5 books on my shelf. They look fantastic with the spines sticking out, the different colors. They look gorgeous. But to me, it really works best when done as a series. If you have a standalone book, it's going to be a little unusual for you to have a cover like that. But by all means, say you're putting out 3 books and you're putting them all up for sale in relatively quick succession, especially, it could potentially be a good option for you, especially if you can find a way to incorporate into the artwork maybe a little Easter egg where your reader has to kind of think a little bit about what significance this item or what significance this very particular design has to your story. Certainly nothing wrong with that. So now what I would like to do is get a little bit into the process of finding an artist. Now, the main objective of this particular episode was to give you a few thoughts on the different types of cover art out there and what might work for you. Just get you thinking about that a little bit. But I feel like it would be a huge missed opportunity to not touch on this subject at all. I think I just butchered the word opportunity a few seconds ago, and I could go back and edit it out and re-record the whole line, but to me that just adds to the charm of the podcast, doesn't it? And so does this rambling explanation of how I can't explain the word See what I did there? I was going to say I can't pronounce the word opportunity, but I said I can't explain the word opportunity. I apparently haven't slept enough this week, so I'm just going to shut up and start talking again. So, we need to talk a little bit about the process of finding the right artist for you. Now, if you're not as fortunate as me to personally know an extremely talented artist that's capable of doing this kind of project, you're likely going to have to hire someone. Now, I discussed in my previous episode Once again, that's going to be linked in the pinned comment down below. Make sure you check that out. It talked a lot about the pricing, what you can expect to pay for a professional cover, but I also talked about the various options that are out there in terms of obtaining your cover art. So I'm not going to go into those areas in great depth here. If you want to hear my thoughts on that, go down below, click on that pinned comment, and I will ramble on at length to you about that, I promise. So what are some things, though, that you need to look out for when it comes to hiring an artist? First thing, most important thing, do they have a portfolio on their website or their advertisement or wherever it is you're finding them? Okay, so they have a portfolio. They should have sample covers up there of work that they've done in the past, right? Are these books actually for sale? Here's the thing, I've actually spotted a few where people have these covers up claiming that they did these for people, and yet when I go to try to look for the book, I can find no record of it ever being for sale. That's not to say it's a bad looking cover, but to me that's a little bit unethical if you're posing this as something that you're saying you did for an actual client and then it's not up for sale. And this is happening multiple times. I could see it happening once, so maybe the author just hasn't put it up for sale yet. But if half of your portfolio I can't find, to me that's a potential issue. I want to see that people have actually used you. Do they have testimonials up of authors they've worked with? Another great thing you could do, especially if they work with a smaller independent author in the past and you see their cover up there, look that author up. Maybe on Instagram or Facebook or whatever social media platforms they have. Reach out to them. Read their book. If it sounds like it's your cup of tea, if you like their book, engage with them. Talk to them a little bit. Ask them questions. What was it like working with this artist? Did you enjoy the process? Did they make it easy for you? Did it feel like you were pulling teeth? These type of things. Authors are great resources for each other. Another thing you'll want to review is exactly what type of rights you are getting. So for example, I pulled up a listing here on Fiverr of a cover artist, and I'm reading through it. They offer great prices, 100% money back guarantee. What I'm not seeing here, okay, this is what I see. Premium stock image included in all packages. Okay, you want to make sure, I touched on this briefly earlier when talking about the character-based artwork, you want to make sure this person is doing things correctly, that they're doing things in a legal manner. So you want to make sure they have the legal right to use the imagery that they're going to put on your book. For example, they're not stealing artwork from a fellow artist without their permission, throwing it on your book saying, here you go, and then a year down the road that artist sees your book. That could potentially be a very big problem for you. You want to save yourself those headaches. Make sure the person you're working with is professional and they're reputable. You want to know exactly what you're getting for the price you're paying. This is, again, something I go into in great detail in my previous episode. Pinned comment down below. So are you just getting an ebook cover? Are you getting an ebook and a paperback, and an ebook and a paperback, and an audio book and a hardback wraparound? Make sure you understand exactly what is included in the pricing that they're offering you. Do they offer free revisions? Do they offer a limited number of revisions? So if you don't like something about the cover, are there only so many times that they're going to be willing to revise that for you before they start charging you again? These are things you want to watch out for. I would say that any reputable artist should be comfortable offering a certain amount of free revisions. I've seen some for people who offer no revisions whatsoever. That, to me, I'm not saying they don't have good artwork, but you don't know that the final product is going to be exactly what you want. So to me, that's a bit of a red flag, and I would probably, from my point of view, steer away from an artist that doesn't offer any amount of revision at all. The most important thing that I would say you need to know is that it's okay to ask questions. You have to. This is your book. This is something that you've invested a lot of time in, a lot of your effort in. Don't be afraid to ask questions of any professional person that you're going to hire to help you deliver this, whether that be a cover artist, an editor. Plug, stay tuned for our episode on editors 2 weeks from now. But it's okay to ask these people questions. You have to understand, if they're going to offer their services out there and ask for your money in return for them, they should be willing to answer these questions. And if they're not, again, red flag. Maybe consider looking elsewhere. If it seems like they don't have time for you, they think you're a nuisance, I don't have time to answer all these questions, how much time are they going to have to invest into this piece of work that's so important to you and your book? Something to keep in mind. Well, I promised you that I wouldn't ramble on for an hour this time, and while I don't have the final time yet, I think I have kept that promise. I hope you found today's discussion illuminating. When it comes to cover art, one thing that I'll say, just based on my own experience, is it's such a rewarding feeling when you finally get to see a physical manifestation of this story that you've poured so much of yourself into. So do your best to make this a joyous process for you. You've put in all of this hard work. It can be a little intimidating to turn this part of your work over to somebody else. But when you see the final product, it's a great feeling, guys. And I really hope that you enjoy it as much as I did. And if you didn't, if you feel like this isn't what you wanted, then consider getting different cover art. It's like I said at the beginning, the phrase "don't judge a book by its cover" exists for a reason, because people judge books by their covers all the time. So know what's right for you. Know this going in. Don't be afraid to ask questions. Always advocate for your story. Make sure you're hiring the right people. Again, if you're more interested in places where you can find cover artists and knowing a little bit more about what the cost is, I did touch on these subjects in my last episode on the costs of self-publishing. It's in the pinned comment. I know I've said it 15 times. I know it's getting annoying, but I can't stress it enough. It's a resource that's there, and I hope it can be helpful for you, much like I hope this episode was. Going forward, we'll be back in 2 weeks, August 13th. Our next topic in this publishing series is going to be working with a professional editor. So I hope that can also be illuminating for you. That's one of the more intimidating parts of the publishing process, isn't it? And it's one that applies to both self and traditional publishing. So I think that could be one that's of interest to a lot of people. So I hope you'll come back in 2 weeks. If you liked the episode today, please hit the thumbs up button. It makes a huge difference. And if you're interested in that episode or any episodes going forward, I have the schedule on the screen right about now with the entire publishing series that I'm doing. You can hit subscribe. I have a little red arrow in the corner. You can click it. Get notified anytime I release a new episode. I do episodes pretty much every 2 weeks on writing, the writing process, books, pretty much whatever I feel like sitting down and waxing onto the microphone about. If you have any questions, comments, feedback you'd like to share with the podcast, I'm more than happy to read your comments on the show. PeteBeal.com is my website. It's linked down below. I have a form you can fill out. Say whatever you want. I will read it on the podcast. I'll read your name and credit you unless you don't want me to. There's an option where if you'd rather remain anonymous, you can do that. I don't have any problem with that. Also, if you are a writer, an author, a cover artist, a publisher, an editor, you'd like to appear on this podcast, like to promote yourself, like to talk about books, about reading, about writing, whatever it is you want to talk about, that can also be found at my website, petebeal.com. I'm pretty much committed to this series of episodes through the end of September, but after that, I would be more than happy to take guests again, so something to consider. So with that, dear listeners, we're going to wrap this up. Once again, 2 weeks, August 13th, I'll be back talking about working with a professional editor. In the meantime, please stay safe, stay healthy, stay creative, and always keep writing. Thank you very much.